What's up, people? I'm Shaggy the Opinionated Hippie, and this is part 19 of my reviewing and ranking King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard studio albums, going in order from 1 through 19. It's my Friday video, and we're on album 19, Made in Timeland, which came out in March of 2022. Short album, 30 minutes long, exactly, consists of 2 tracks, both 15 minutes long. This band does not do anything randomly, it seems. So if they call an album Made in Timeland, there is a reason for that. And so musically, there is a very metronomic, percussive element that goes through the entire, what is 2 tracks, but the 2 tracks segue into each other. As the first track dies out, we get that metronomic, percussive element that repeats before we go into the second track. And there are definitely, I think the first track has a much stronger identity than the second track, and the second track even sort of incorporates some of the same sort of music that is in the first track. So it almost feels like, you know, they probably did it for publishing reasons or something. It almost feels like it might be a more impressive release to drop this as 1 track, to be honest with you. But we'll get into that in a second. Sort of an interesting story behind this release, because it is only 30 minutes long, and it does seem like it was not intended to be officially released, is the vibe I get. It was going to be made on vinyl and given to attendees of a music festival that I think was supposed to happen at the end of 2021, the Timeland Festival. That festival got canceled. They had this album. So they eventually, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, eventually released it on like the hard vinyl in March of 2022, this 30-minute album. But then, like a month and a half later, they released their next album, which is a double album. So this really almost seems like, hey, this double album's not coming out till April. Let's drop this thing now. So there is sort of a like half-hearted's not the word, but just like, hey, why not type vibe to it. Also, my understanding is a lot of this music was made to play in like the intermission of their tours, I think it was, during their concerts. But then they decided to develop it into like a full album. And I think they were this was still COVID. They still were not together as a band. I believe the next album, the double album, is the first time they had got together as a band since the pandemic happened. And so I think the process for this album, and when you know the process, it like, okay, that makes sense, is that each band member contributed like motifs or ideas or movements, or just like, hey, I think it would be really cool if we had a 1-minute percussive section like this, or I have this keyboard idea. And they sent them to Mackenzie, and then Mackenzie sort of, made songs out of all the disparate pieces that were sent to him. That's my understanding of how the process played out. And when you listen to it, you're like, yeah, that kind of sounds like how the process played out. A really interesting listen. I can't say it's a bad listen. It's for the most part instrumental. The first track, I think they say Timeland, Timeland in a really weird way at one point. And then there's also just some weird, it's like, I don't know if it's nonsense, if it's a different language, but like almost Peter Gabriel, like chanting in the background, like almost like tribal vibe. But it's psych and it's weird, but the way it's mixed in the music and the percussive element that surrounds it, it does give it that sort of Peter Gabriel vibe, but in a completely different sense and a completely different like context and purpose. And then the second song actually has lyrics right in the middle of the song, or about maybe 6 or 7 minutes into the song. You actually get singing and lyrics. And then at the end of the song, at the end of the 30 minutes, you get a whole batch of lyrics delivered in kind of a rap style. There's kind of a like swagger presentation style, which predicts what's going to happen on the next album twice, for good or for bad. We'll get to that when we get to that album next week. But yeah, so I don't know what I was saying. Oh yeah, so it's mostly instrumental. And both tracks kind of have different vibes. The first track, which is called Timeland, is very much like psych house music. If like everything King Gizzard has done is like heavily filtered through a psych lens or poorly filtered through a psych lens, not sure which one. It's very psychedelic. So this is house music as King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard would imagine it. I would imagine. There's definitely a dance vibe, a house vibe that goes through it. It almost sounds like LCD Sound System and Kraftwerk were just like making a psych album together. It goes through, and it really is like this metronomic beat that is consistent through the entire 15 minutes with just like, we're driving, like the metronomic beat is the vehicle we're in, and we're just, it's almost like a Disneyland ride where we're like driving through like, It's a Small World, where we're in Asia for 30 seconds and then we're in Europe for 30 or a minute, So you're just going through all of these different environments while this sort of metronomic beat kind of just like, is the thread that binds them all together. And at times it's really cool to see how the transitions work. At times it's kind of frustrating because like there's a really good idea that they abandoned way too soon. I definitely think that happens more in the second track, Smoke and Mirrors. I think because Timeland is more house music focused and more dance focused and has that very electronic, that vibe, boom, boom, boom vibe, it works a little better as one continuous fluid piece. Because even though there are these different changes that we go through, the continuity of that really, really consistent beat, which doesn't waver as much as it will in the second track, or at least not waver, but be expressed in different ways as it will in the second track. I think the first track works a little better. But yeah, we get a really, opens up with like a really chill kind of techno beat. And then about the 2-minute mark, after we get this ambient sort of sound, we get more of an LCD Kraftwerk type bigger dance vibe. We get some weird lyrics in there. We get a lot of dance beats. At some point we get some really nice moody synth that kind of lays over everything that provides some really cool flirting with Pink Floyd vibes. In fact, at the end of Timeland, there is a section that almost sounds like it's directly ripping off On the Run. Like they had to have heard On the Run. On the Run had to have been in the inspiration for it, because it is very much that sort of like keyboard whoosh vibe that's going on. But yeah, really weird. We're kind of all over the place. At times it gets heavy. At times it gets soft and chill. At times it gets ominous. At times it just kind of steps back a little. But yeah, the first 15 minutes, it really is. It's a neat journey the first couple times you listen to it. But then after a while, I just don't think there's as much payoff. And in a weird way, this entire album and both tracks remind me of Flaming Lips sort of excursions into like, what is the name of it? They did the 24-hour song. They did I Found This Star on the Ground, which was like a 6-hour song. And it seems like they took Flaming Lips' idea of taking like the Flaming Lips song. I've listened to the 24-hour song once, not in a row. I think I listened to it twice. Didn't we play it once? I think my wife and I tried to play it nonstop in the house and we slept through part of it. I've listened to the 6-hour song a couple times, and the 6-hour song will take an idea and write it for like a half hour with minor little excursions. And then it will slowly usher its way into another idea. And that really long marathon endurance aspect of those, I think, is ultimately a lot more fulfilling than this, which almost feels like not even like a roller coaster, because it's not that like crazy exhilarating of transitions. It's just like, oh, we're here, now we're here, now we're here, now we're here. That's the first part. Second part is kind of the same way, but it definitely loses some of its house dance flavor and it becomes a little more of a psyche number, with like heavier percussive elements. At times you go into, it almost has this like Flaming Lips, going back to the Flaming Lips, where at times the percussion just comes in with this bombast and this loudness and this grandness, and the keyboards are like really loud and powerful, and then we drop back down into something that's a little more chill and maybe slightly jazzy, or maybe a little more Baroque psych going in there, and then we get back to that big bombastic Flaming Lips sort of sound. Really this roller coaster of like psych ideas. But every time they latch onto one, I'm like, okay, there is a really good song here. 30, 40 seconds later, some new element comes in that completely reshapes it in a way that's like not what the original song that I thought was really good was. Particularly around the 6 minute mark of the second song, Smoke and Mirrors, there's this really cool, it's like I think it's the percussion kind of steps back a little, but there's this really cool keyboard vibe that comes in at the 6 minute mark, and it goes for about 30 to 40 seconds. It's kind of emotional. There's a little bit of a spiritual pull to it, but then right when it's like, I don't know, I'm into the groove and I've accepted this is what it is and I'm really enjoying it. Just this heavy percussion comes over on top of it, and then we get back to that groove, but then we're throwing in all this stuff in the mix, and it's like, okay. Like you made a soup that had an incredible base, like just absolutely delicious, but now you're adding all the wrong ingredients and making it just taste completely different. That's the way I feel more about the second part. The first part is just like, oh, we should have stuck around with that longer. The second part is like, yeah, we should have stuck around with that longer, but you're adding things I don't want to hear. Where in the first part, I'm like, okay, I like this new part. I just wish that part was longer. This part is like the second song, Smoke and Mirrors. I'm like, okay, I don't really like this part as much as I like that first part. You're just adding elements that are intrusive. And now you're going somewhere cool with those intrusive elements, but it's still not as good as where you were. That happens to me a couple times in that second song. But yeah, some weird vocals in the middle of this around the 5 minute mark. After the weird vocals come in, that's when you get the really cool part in the Smoke and Mirrors. We kind of abandon that too soon. Things get heavier. We get chill for a while. We get more dance music with kind of crazy psych keyboards. It's a little more synthy and twerky and weirdy. Towards the end, we get about the last 3 or 4 minutes, it goes into this slightly Eastern vibe, almost like just like Chinese meditation music or something, where it's almost, there's not a sitar or like a piano, but it almost feels like it's a little more like you're in a temple meditating for a while when still all this weird psych dance chaos is going around you. As we get really close to the end, we get this nice, just low solo piano part that comes in for a very brief while before the drums come back. And then we get that weird rap-ish thing that ends the album, which we reference Timeland, the first song. We reference Smoke and Mirrors, the second song. It's just, it's a whirlwind of, it's a weird listening experience. Like, it's one of those I'm glad I listened to. It's one of those I think my understanding of King Gizzard on the whole is just fleshed out a little bit more because of this album. There are connections in previous albums in which they had sort of, like, there's a lot of moments in here in which I'm like, oh, this is a really good middle jam. Like, if they had written a song to surround like this little 30 to 40 second interlude, that's going to make any song better. And so there's a lot of these little interludes that I think are really good, either as sort of shorter pieces on a longer conceptual album, like a Murder of the Universe, where you have these sort of instrumental conceptual ties, or as actual sort of breakdown moments in a song. There's a lot of these in there. But as I'm finding out every time I listen to this, having nothing but those interludes back to back to back to back, even as well produced as it is, like, I would love to, like, I don't know if there is a documentary out there about this album. I don't know what's out there. If there is, let me know. But I would love to see Mackenzie getting all these different pieces and be like, okay, I got this and I got this. How am I going to make this into one piece? I think there's something really fascinating about this. It goes to the mystique of the band. It goes to the mythos of the band. It goes to just how incredibly awesome this band is and their willingness to experiment and do things. But as an overall listening experience, as an album in a catalog that is like deep, deep, deep with incredible music. Like, there's literally not a bad album. We're 19 albums into it. Yes, there are albums I like more than others. No, there is not a bad album. Or yes, there is not a bad album. You know what I mean? There's not a bad album. Even the ones on the bottom of my list, they're not bad albums. So this is not a bad album. The re-listening experience is really just not there, only because I do think it's not satisfying. Like, this band could take so many of these ideas and really make them into something more. So it's just kind of a little bit of a frustrating listen in that way. But I pull it out, every once in a while. I'll just be around the house doing something, and it's kind of great background music. It's good driving music if you got a bunch of people in the car and you're gonna have a conversation and you're not gonna be able to listen to it. I've done that a couple times, and I just like ticking away in the background. A good listen. But anyways, yeah, it's if you're not a King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard fan, save it. This is one of those albums you get when like you discover the band, you've bought everything, you need to have everything. Yeah, you get this. You need this in your collection. It definitely is like, it's a deleted scene on the DVD, but if you're a hardcore fan of that director, of that actor, of that movie, you want all those deleted scenes, even though they might not actually add anything to the movie. You're like, oh, I appreciate that is there. That's kind of the way I feel about Made in Timeland. I appreciate it's here. Not sure how often I'm going to listen to it. But yeah. Where would I rank it among the other 19 I've already done? No surprise by this point. It's at the bottom. And I'm looking at the time, realizing I've made a video about a 30-minute album into 15 minutes. So I am rambling a lot here, and I apologize. But yeah, fascinating release. Even though it is at the bottom of my list, it just makes me love this band even more. And especially knowing what comes after this, because they released this in like early March of 2022. April, 6 weeks later, they drop a monster album, which I'll talk about next week. But yeah, it's almost like, hey, been riding roller coasters all day. Now let's just sit down and have a little break, get some food. This is that sustenance building thing. If you had a day at the park, you got to take a break, man. If I go to Bonnaroo Music Festival, I want to see bands from 12 to 3 in the morning. But sometimes you just got to take a break or you're going to collapse. This is one of those you got to take a break albums. But I enjoy it. I like breaks. I like to be rested. All right, I'm rambling. That's all I got. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, comment, do all those things. If you haven't heard this album, it's on streaming. I'm sure it's on YouTube. Check it out. It's an interesting listen. All right, let me know your thoughts on this, all that stuff. Peace. Talk to you later.